Disclaimer. Any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. And today I'm excited to be joined by my guest, Dr. Kelly Flanagan. And I'm really excited to hear about Kelly's new book and all the work he's doing in the world. So just a quick introduction to Dr. Kelly. So Dr. Kelly Flanagan is an award-winning author, international speaker, concierge coach, and licensed clinical psychologist with 2 decades of expertise in interpersonal relationships. His thought leadership has been featured in the 5 Love Languages, The Today Show, Reader's Digest, HuffPost, and Success Magazine. The proprietary frameworks in his next book, The Road Less Triggered, Turning Conflict into Connection with a Single Choice, will take the connections in your relationships to levels that traditional communication strategies can't touch. Welcome to the show today, Dr. Kelly. Glad to have you on.
Johnny, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I was saying before the show to Dr. Kelly, I'm really excited to hear about some of this work because the word trigger comes up for many people I hear, and there's quite a bit of discussion around it these days. So yeah, the fact this new book is got that in the title is going to be a good conversation for sure.
Absolutely. I just had someone tell me that they can't buy the book because the word triggered is triggering. So yes. This is a relevant word in our culture for sure.
That doesn't surprise me, but yeah, it's the word trigger could be triggering. That's interesting. I'd love to just ask a very simple one, because sometimes when we hear the word like psychology, we think human behavior, the mind of what we're doing. But I'd love to hear, I know there's like a few different versions out there with definitions and things, but
right.
I'd love to hear from you, what is a clinical psychologist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the first questions you get asked is like, so is that the one that prescribes medications or the one that just talks to you? Right. And what people are asking is, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist, to begin with? So very different. So a psychiatrist is someone who went to medical school and then somewhere in the middle of medical school decided they were going to specialize in psychiatry. And so it's sort of like, instead of going into surgery, they go into psychiatry. They can prescribe medications. A licensed clinical psychologist is someone who's gotten either a degree of psychology or a degree of philosophy, right? A PhD or a PsyD. And we have specialized in the use of talking as a tool for healing, essentially. And so I got a PhD at Penn State University, went to University of Illinois for undergrad, and then on to Penn State for graduate school, and got my PhD in clinical psychology with a specialty for me in communication and conflict resolution. That's what I did So I guess a little bit of background. What does a PhD mean? It means you did a master's thesis. So you did a research project in which you studied something related to your specialty. In my case, I studied how couples can use humor to soften the necessary sort of criticism and feedback they have to give in relationships. That's what I did my master's thesis on. And then my doctoral dissertation, which is a much bigger research project, I focused on specifically underneath the things we talk about in relationships, like who's going to pick up Johnny from school and, why Monday Night Football doesn't count as a date, what are the relationship needs we're actually talking about and expressing underneath those topical conversations. And so in my dissertation, I identified 5 ultimately. The first one was for love and affection. Second need was for commitment and priority. Third need was for respect and appreciation. Fourth need was for power and equality. And fifth need was for autonomy and independence. So in that research project, I studied 200 newlywed couples interacting for 15 minutes about a problem in their relationship, and coded all those interactions to identify what are they really asking for underneath the surface of their conversations. And then you do enough of that kind of research and they give you a PhD, and then you get to go out in the world and you get licensed by the state to become a clinical psychologist and to actually start to practice what you've learned with people.
Wow, a lot of different people to experiment on in the world as well.
It took me 22 years, 22 consecutive years of school. So you got your 4 years of undergrad, and then it takes about 6 years of graduate school. You do an additional residency. I did mine at a veterans hospital outside of Chicago, and then at that point you can specialize either in therapy. Some people go into academics, other people go into consultation and that sort of thing. But for me, right out of grad school, I became an outpatient mental health therapist and started working with people right away.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that are coming to mind
Sure.
I'm fascinated by already. And it's I guess the first one's the fascination with people, like or
Mm,
kind of like behavior and how people interact with each other, what's really
yep.
going on below the surface, as you touched on. Has
Yep.
it always been something your whole life you've been fascinated by, just like
Mm.
human behavior?
It's a great question. I remember it was probably like my junior year of high school, I took my first psychology class. And I remember being fascinated by what the human mind is capable of doing, essentially in order to protect itself. I got really interested in what's called dissociative identity, the ability to sort of like split your experiences and personalities and compartmentalize them to manage painful experiences. And so, yeah, I went to the University of Illinois knowing I was interested in psychology, but not quite sure which path I'd go down in the field. And it was my sophomore year at the University of Illinois. And I had a situation where I needed to every semester turn a class into an honors class by writing an additional paper. And the professor said to me, I remember her first name was Jill, and she said to me, well, what's the one problem you want to solve in the world? And I was like the gut reaction was conflict, miscommunication, conflict resolution. So I did that first honors paper on the topic of marriage and conflict resolution, and that really set me down a path. The professor that I interviewed for that paper, I ended up joining their laboratory at the University of Illinois, and then it was sort of off to the races from there.
Oh wow, that's quite a
Yeah.
journey. You mentioned about like yeah conflict there, and also a bit earlier around going beneath like the surface of these conversations. What
Mhm.
do you think kind of holds people back or holds people at that kind of surface level interaction?
I think the human mind is organized around creating a sense of safety from moment to moment. That's sort of what the whole organism is trying to do, is to
Mm,
stay safe. And so the surface level of a conversation is a relatively safe place to stay. If you say, "Well, I don't understand why you go to the gym after work instead of coming straight home and helping out with the kids," you're talking about like you're making a sort of a practical request of your partner. And
mm,
if they don't really want to participate in that request, there's not a ton lost. In fact, you can just go to your girlfriends and explain what a terrible person your husband is, and then you can sort of get a sense of belonging there. But if you say to your partner, I don't feel like I belong to you, like, I don't feel like we're on the same team. I don't feel a sense of togetherness with you. I'm not sure that when push comes to shove, you've got my back. And you
mm,
start to engage at that level of relational depth, then if a person can't meet you there, then it hurts a lot more.
mm,
And uh, it's sort of more deeply wounding. So I think we tend to want to just we try to litigate and negotiate deep relational needs in very surface safe ways. And that's just because that's what our minds are designed to do, is to try to keep us as safe as possible.
mm. It's almost like really expressing like your true needs, and if someone's like, and it doesn't get the way you want, or you feel like
Yeah.
slightly rejected, that might be a lot more harmful than if I say, why don't you pick up the kids or something, high at the top.
Precisely. When we lead with a sort of a protective false self and that false self gets dinged, there wasn't a ton at stake. It wasn't us that got rejected. It was our protections. It was our
Mm,
our negotiations, so to speak. And so when we really show up authentically and say what we really need, and the person still isn't able to step up and meet that need, that hurts. That cuts deep.
it makes it resonate a lot of that, just even in my own experience in life. Yeah, but it's beautiful when you can have those deep conversations as well. And
Well,
like,
and one of the things we discovered in that dissertation study was that when a person would actually articulate explicitly the thing that they need, then the very next behavior by their partner determined their long-term satisfaction in the relationship. So I say, I just don't feel like you really respect or appreciate me as a person. Like, I don't think you really like me, right? If their partner is able to sort of meet that with a safe response a positive behavior, an affirming behavior, then that little interchange right there was predictive of long-term satisfaction in the relationship. If the response was negative in that moment, it didn't matter how positive their partner was for the whole rest of the interaction. It mattered in that vulnerable moment where they showed up and said what they needed. And so we really need to recognize in our relationships when our partners are being brave and they're stepping out and they're saying the deeper thing. Like, you want a high ROI moment in your relationship, it's to show up and be a safe space for that to land. And it will outweigh everything else you do for the whole rest of the evening.
I can see, yeah, how as a holding space is so important. Well, I know in relationship as well, done it badly, admittedly, as a human being.
Right? Haven't we all?
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I just think, like, for the individual who's maybe they're hearing that and they've kind of heard, like, I feel like I can't be myself with this relationship or people in general, maybe it's close friends, and they're like, I just want to be me, but I'm so scared of being rejected. How can they kind of move forward with, work through that a little bit so they're more connected to their needs?
Well, first of all, number one, I would encourage them that they are ahead of the curve if they just even know that, right? Like, the majority of people are walking around sort of camped out safely inside of a false self, and they don't even really know that that's what's happening. They think their false self is who they are. Okay. So I would encourage that person to say, this thing that feels really insecure to you, that where you're not really showing up as your authentic self, you're actually ahead of the game. That's pretty impressive that you have that awareness. Number two, you're not weird. You're not alone. I often say that we all feel like we have imposter syndrome because everybody else looks like they're just getting a latte, right? But inside, they're getting a latte and wondering if the bartender really liked how they showed up, really liked what they said, or really thought they were funny, and the barista or whatever. Like, everybody is walking around in the same predicament that you are. You are not alone, number one. Number two, actually. And then number three, I had a driver's ed instructor in high school, and he would start out every semester of driver's ed. And I live in Northern Illinois, I grew up here. And he would start out every semester saying, by the time I'm done with you, you're going to be able to drive on LSD. And what he meant was Lakeshore Drive, which is the big, busy road in Chicago. But that was his way of saying, like, when you start to practice something, you don't go right to the busy highway. He took us to the empty parking lot at the local junior college, and that's where we got our start. And so when you're practicing showing up authentically, don't try to don't go on a podcast like this, don't pick the person who you feel the most pressure to connect with and try to do it with them. Find the empty parking lots in your life and get repetitions in those easier spaces. And which is one of the reasons clinical psychologists exist, right? It's one of the reasons talk therapy exists. It's an empty parking lot for you to practice showing up authentically in. And if it goes well, then you'll start to generalize that to tougher situations in your real life until, by the way, driving in an empty parking lot feels really boring. So you'll quit your therapy, which is great. You'll be like, all right, therapist, thank you. I know how to do this out in the real world now, and I'm going to go just drive the highways. So yeah, that a series of encouragements there for that person walking around. You're not alone. It gets better. Put in the work.
I like the idea. I like the analogy of an empty car park as well, parking lot. So yeah, it's it can be interpreted, I guess. And this is just a perception that maybe someone's like, oh, I've got to go out and then tell my biggest fears to people.
Yes. Yeah. And what that is that's rushing through the vulnerability. It's because staying in the vulnerable space is so hard, you want to rush through it and get it all over with. So I'll just write the blog post and tell everybody, or I'll blast it out on TikTok. And it's actually, it's a lot harder to stay in that moment with someone in person and to get that rep of learning how to be vulnerable in that moment. As recently as 2011, I was in my own therapy, and my therapist made a great suggestion. And I was at that point, I'd invested 10 years in starting a young family, wife, 3 kids. My friendships had sort of fallen by the wayside, and I was feeling insecure about starting friendships again. It's a whole different relational muscle than husband and dad, And he said, I tell you what, pick 3 people in your life who, these aren't the people who you have the most in common with, or you think, they're the people who, when you're with them, it just feels a little bit easier to be you than when you're with other. It just you walk away going, that was easier. I have a little more energy when I walk away. Pick 3 people, ask them out for a cup of coffee. Those are your empty parking lots. right? Go practice in those relationships. And I would recommend the same thing to anybody listening. Who are the 3 people you're like, yeah, it's just a little bit easier. I feel a little bit less on guard, come away a little more energized. Give them a call, have a cup of coffee.
I love that example. Yeah. Where you feel like you can be yourself with people and your real self. Find that.
And you're not really paying attention to the subtleties of that usually. So when someone says, actually pay attention to that, there are probably already right now a few people in your life that you would probably feel more comfortable going a little deeper with than other people, and just make the intentional effort to do so. And one of those guys, by the way, from 2011, tomorrow afternoon, we'll have our monthly phone call. We live in separate parts of the country now, but we're still best of friends, and we make sure to touch base once a month. So yeah, it can turn into a really beautiful lifelong friendship.
Oh, fantastic. You're still in touch. I love that.
Yeah.
I want to kind of go the other side a little bit. I'm just thinking of those who may have been really hurt from, they've been vulnerable. Maybe it was with a partner or a friend, and that vulnerability was like maybe used, they perceive as being used against them, or it really didn't go the way they planned, and they really have a trouble with vulnerability. Is there a kind of way they can move through that?
There's a number of levels of answers. So such a good question. And one of my questions for a person like that in that situation would be, have you fully felt the pain of what happened? When we've had the courage to be vulnerable with somebody, to become attached to somebody, to invest in a relationship, to have that not work out, sort of against our will, if you will, you have to go through a bit of a grieving process in order to fully release that and be ready to try again. When you love someone and they literally pass away, you don't say, well, I guess I'll never love anybody again. But what you do have to do is you have to fully grieve the loss and let it go, so you can handle it. So you can handle the disappointment and the loss and the grief. So now you're more prepared to love again. And if that one doesn't work out, you'll get better at handling loss and disappointment and grief. And so I would say, that part of what you got to do when you've been hurt, when you've been vulnerable and it didn't work out, you got to fully grieve the hopes that you had for that relationship. You have to fully feel the pain of it all the way through. And if you can do that, you'll find yourself more resilient and more prepared for the next relationship. And the reality is, this is the wild thing. Like, I just said this to my 18-year-old son. When we're talking about romantic relationships, none of them work out in your whole life except for one, usually, right? Like, they're all disappointments and hurt and pain until the one that lasts. And that one isn't always easy, And so we actually have to become very skilled at feeling the pain of disappointment in relationships in order to be able to show up to them and to sort of withstand the ups and downs of relationships resiliently. So, again, I'd say it's normal. Your hesitation to jump back into relationship is probably healthy. It's telling you that you haven't grieved the pain of the previous relationship entirely, but make sure you do the work of grieving it, because that's preparing you to do the next relationship.
Feeling into it, I know. So, sometimes grief is a difficult thing for people to do, or it's completely missed and without awareness altogether.
It's a big word, and I think it can be simplified as like allowing yourself to feel the full sadness of what happened. I think it can be simplified that way. But when you're hesitating to be vulnerable, what you can know is 2 things. You can know that you were hurt in the past, because that's how you know, I'm not sure I want to be vulnerable again, because that hurt. That if being vulnerable always felt great, you'd never hesitate to do it again. Yeah. So when you're hesitating to be vulnerable, in some way you were hurt in the past, and you are saying, I'm not sure I want to go through that again. Right? But as we get good at being able to feel the full pain of disappointment in relationships, and we learn how to feel that sadness and let it flow through and learn that it doesn't destroy us, then we don't have to protect quite as much against the next pain, because we know we can handle it, because we're resilient, because we know how to go through it. And that's what allows us to really come forward fully and be truly authentic and vulnerable, is our willingness to endure the disappointment if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, just knowing you got the capacity to hold yourself in that space, I guess.
Exactly. It's much more marketable, by the way, to be like, I got your top 3 steps for how to make sure your vulnerability always works out.
Yeah. With human beings, it doesn't quite work like that.
It doesn't work like that. People need to be sold what they need, not what they necessarily want. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that, it can be hard, but you'll learn from it, you'll feel through it, and you'll be stronger as a result.
That's some good guidance. So, Kelly, I'd love to know about your book. your new book, The Road Less Triggered. What's the word triggered mean for you?
That's a good question. So, first of all, I'll say I wrote the whole book under a different title, but more and more as the book sort of solidified, it was clear that what the book is about is learning how to navigate the triggered moments in our lives and in our relationships. In fact, I'm at the point where I would say like 90% of our growth, personal growth and relational growth, happens in those triggered moments. And then the rest of it is just sort of getting to enjoy the fruit of the growth that happens in those moments. So okay, book's going to be about these triggered moments, but I'm like, I don't know about putting triggered in the title. It's an overused word these days, like I don't know, an influencer on TikTok gets the wrong latte at Starbucks and they're triggered and they're blasting out the trauma to all of their followers. And at the same time, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, so I know the word triggered is literally related to like combat trauma, right? And actual mental health diagnoses. And so it's like, well, how do I use this properly? And so when the concept, one of my favorite books of all time is The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, another clinical psychologist, one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. And I was talking with a friend one day, and I said, "Hey, I'm having a hard time landing this title. I keep thinking of a treasure map and how our triggered moments are actually like an X on a treasure map. And what we need to do is when we find the X, when we get triggered, we need to dig into that and find the treasure that's buried beneath that, the personal, emotional, and relational growth that comes from that. But what we tend to do when we find a triggered moment is like brush the X out of the sand, try to go around it, not ever come back to that spot again." He called me back like a half an hour later. He's like, "Kelly, like, I get that metaphor, but it just feels like a lot of pressure to have to like find that moment and dig into it. The way you actually talk about these triggered moments is like they're a fork in the road. Like in your triggered moment, you can let yourself close your heart to what's going on and you can go down that path into your same old pattern and be imprisoned in your same old pattern. Or you can choose this other path of growth and evolution in that moment." And so I remember I went and I worked out afterwards and I'm like laying on the ground doing sit-ups or something. And I'm like, yeah, working the road less traveled, the road less triggered. That's a title I can get on board with because it's not promising some sort of utopia where we never get triggered again. It's promising that if you follow the process I lay out in this book, you're going to be less and less triggered over time, right? And so that's how we wound up with that. But that meant that in the very first page, I needed to add a paragraph about what triggered means to me. It's not the watered down version of triggered that culture, and internet culture has sort of taken over. It's also not this clinical term reserved for combat veterans. It's this very specific moment that happens over and over and over again in our relationships. And it's this moment when our nervous system fires up, which by the way is only supposed to happen when you are mortally threatened, but it happens all the time in relationships. Our nervous system fires up and our heart closes and we refuse to participate with this anymore. All right. We can't stay open to it. We can't stay in connection with what's happening. So that paragraph, if anyone ends up picking up the book, you'll discover it's on like page 1 that triggered are relational moments, usually when our heart closes down and our nervous system fires up.
Thanks for defining it. And yeah, so the book's basically a journey of like how you can work through like triggers and kind of reduce them.
Yeah, it really is. And it's so a little over 5 years ago, I didn't handle the COVID year very well. Let's put it that way. I started off COVID year, triggered in various ways, blew up my business partnership with my best friend, accidentally blew up the best friendship in the process. COVID hit. Kids were schooling from home. I was trying to figure out how to keep my business viable in the midst of COVID. Like I was getting triggered left and right. Right in the middle of that year, that COVID summer, my wife, she leveraged the COVID situation to get us an above ground pool. She'd been trying to convince me for years. And she's like, well, all the pools are closing this summer, so now we got to get a pool. So we had one installed. And on a Sunday morning, she went out to fill it up for the first time and she hung the hose over the side. And then she put a rock on the hose to anchor it there. But the rock wasn't heavy enough. And we didn't go out for hours. And so I went out on Sunday afternoon and the pool was bone dry and our backyard was just a lake. And like I got really triggered. I'm like, I'm going to say and do something to her that I'm going to regret for weeks here if I don't get out of here. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to blow off steam on a bike ride. Not the smartest thing to do, to be really angry riding 35 miles an hour on asphalt. I almost hit a car, pumped the brakes, went over the handlebar, broke my left collarbone in two places on the asphalt road. Didn't heal properly. I got two hinges in that collarbone, but it made for this really long recovery. So by the time I got to New Year's Eve, going into 2021, I was really out of shape. And I was contemplating fitness resolutions for the next year. And I came across this quote from Michael Singer in a book called The Untethered Soul, which is a
Good
fantastic
book.
book, right? And the quote was, "Do not let anything in life be important enough that you're willing to close your heart over it."
Oof, I remember that. Thank you for the
Remember
reminder.
that one?
Yeah.
And it hit me exactly. I mean, it hit me harder than the asphalt road did. It hit me like that. And I was like, this is what's happening. This is why I'm in this predicament
Mm.
right now, is that my heart is closing over and over again, and I'm getting triggered, and I'm reacting out of protection rather than connection. And I need to do something about this. So I made a New Year's resolution going into 2021. The New Year's resolution was moment to moment, I will notice my heart closing and try to open it back up.
Mm.
That was my New Year's resolution. I discovered very quickly that is exceptionally hard to do. I read all of The Untethered Soul again. I think he says in it about 60 times that when your heart closes, just relax and release. And I'm like,
How?
oh, how exactly? In fact, Johnny, I know three different people who traveled all the way to his ashram in Florida, got him face to face and said, Mickey, how do you keep your heart open? And his answer was, you just do it all three times. You just do it. It's like he's some sort of savant and he can't teach the rest of us remedial math, right? So I realized early in 2021 that if there was going to be sort of a curriculum for open-heartedness, a method for keeping your heart open in triggered moments and turning those moments into togetherness, I realized I'm going to have to create it for myself. And so that ultimately became this book. Ultimately, call it the peaceful pivot process. I've spent now about, I guess, well, 5 years in the creation of the peaceful pivot process. It's got three parts: get calm, get free, and get connected. And so the road less triggered walks the reader through this process, through storytelling, through teaching, through case studies, and really mainly through sort of really practical, actionable ideas that people can put into practice in the moment where they're being triggered. So I'm really excited about the early reaction to it. The very first Goodreads review of all time of it said, I don't know how, but he's made something that is exceptionally complicated and confusing feel really simple, which is exactly the goal. Is let's simplify what it means to turn these triggers into togetherness, and keep our heart open in those moments. So yeah, that's the gist of it. That's how it came to be. That's what it is, and I'm really excited right now for people to finally start reading it.
Keeping an open heart.
Easier said than done.
Done. How did you uncover or kind of like figure out, again, there's a lot of like emphasis out there on like hows and stuff, but what was it that you did that made you, I mean, how did you discover the steps for yourself? Was it kind of experimenting a lot of things on yourself?
It was experimenting a lot of things. I'll give you an example. Guidance around managing these moments in relationships picks up once the moment has already started. And what I discovered early on is once you're triggered, like the cat's out of the bag, right? Like try getting that thing back in the bag. I remember a night early on when I was so proud of myself. My wife's been telling me for years, you work too much. You wish you were home with the family more. And I remember an afternoon where I was so proud of myself. Like I'd taken off early. I jumped in and supported with carpools and, had a glass of wine with her when she got home and listened to her day. And so proud of how I'd shown up as a dad and a husband. So we get to the kitchen counter. She's like boiling beans for dinner or something. And I was just about to release my previous book. And I said, hey, can I ask you a question about my book launch? And she looked at me, she goes, do you ever quit working? And like instantly triggered, right? Like boom, like the nervous system's reacting, my tightness in my chest.
Mm.
Um, and so my response to her was, hey, I'm gonna go to the other room and take a few breaths and get myself calm, get my heart back open, and show up the way you deserve for me to show up. It took me 48 hours.
Wow.
48 hours after that closing had happened to get back open. And this is what people discover is that once you're triggered and that closing has happened, it can be really hard to get back open. So the very first step in the process is actually to use your capacity for body awareness to basically predict that your heart is about to close. that your nervous system is about to fire up. There are so many sort of hints and signs within our bodily experience that we're heading in that direction. So step one is sense your conflict coming. Use your sixth sense, your interoception, it's called, to tune into your bodily sensations and go, this is about to happen. I should probably start to work the process right now before I'm already triggered and it's going to take me 2 days to get relaxed again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, anticipate what's coming.
Yeah, anticipate it. I mean, for me, like, what happened last night, Johnny? It happened last night. I was late getting up to the dinner table. I had run late, and I was walking up the stairs, and I could feel some tension in my chest, right? And I could feel myself like getting ready to put on a show, like super positive in the hopes that nobody was upset with me that I was late for dinner, right? Like just try to like force positivity on everybody else. And my heart's closing. I'm starting to do that thing. And what's going to happen, I know, is I'm going to walk in the room. I'm going to act super positive. My wife's going to say, "You're late." And then I'm going to get defensive, right? My heart's going to close more and we're off to the races. Right. So instead, recognizing that my heart's about to close, I walked upstairs. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I'll do better next time." And she's like, "Thank you. Appreciate you saying that." Right. And so if we can sense that we are about to enter into our pattern, then our freedom and our empowerment to change that pattern is expanded dramatically. In fact, there's research that shows that if you basically just rely on your five senses to tune into conflict that's coming, because your five senses only look outward, right? So you basically have to wait for conflict to be happening. If you tune into your bodily sensations, you get about an 80% earlier warning that your heart's about to close, your nervous system is about to fire up, and conflict is coming. Like an 80% bigger gap to actually kind of go, how do I want to handle this? Well, I've still got my wits about me. How do I want to approach this? So for me, that was a big part early on, was realizing that I can get a leg up on this process just by tuning into my closing a lot earlier, 80% sooner.
Yeah, being internal a lot more, it sounds like, yeah.
Which is one of the big pivots in the peaceful pivot process is that when you're about to be triggered or when you are being triggered, your nervous system is activating. And your nervous system is specifically designed to defend you from danger out there, external to you, outside. And so the temptation is to start to react to your people, to try to change your people, to demand that something different happen out there. And this process says that's exactly the moment actually to start looking internally, to start holding awareness for how you're showing up, to start leveraging your power to make a different choice and a different decision in this moment. Because it's really disempowering, actually. I often say, like, when you feel bad in here and you think, I've got to change what my partner thinks, feels, says, believes in order to feel better in here, that's actually really disempowering. But if you can go directly to the source and start to address what's going on in here, you actually have the power to do that. And so yes, it's about disrupting that tendency to want to change everything out there in order to make it feel better in here.
Or what comes to mind is could sometimes an individual maybe change the way they're like behaving, even if it's not like authentic or real to them, just so they hope people behave in a different way as well?
Ooh, that's such a good question. So step 2 of the process is beginning, now that you've created a pause, right? Where you can, just a little bit of a pause where you can kind of go, okay, I notice that I'm starting to close. I notice that I'm entering into protection mode instead of connection mode. The very next step is actually to watch your defensive urges, your protective urges start to kick in, right? You talk about watch your defenses instead of wielding your defenses. Your defensive urges won't go away. They're built into you. They will come up in this moment. But learning how to watch them instead of acting on them is the key. And what you just touched on very intuitively is anytime. So I talk about in the book that it's not just the fight or flight response for human beings, because we have this wonderful frontal lobe which can manage and manipulate things, For human beings, it's the fight, flight, or finagle response. I'm either going to run, I'm going to fight, or I'm going to try to control this situation. So anytime that you notice you are starting to, I'm going to show up in this way to get this reaction out of that person, you're actually in a closed-hearted state. You're in a controlling, manipulative state. You're trying to stay safe by appearing in a certain way, right? So that too is, okay, well, it's actually sort of what I was trying to do last night, or what I had the urge to do. I'll show up positively so that everyone else will have to be positive too,
Mm.
right? It's actually a very, I call it a control. It's not a control freak. It's a control sneak. It's a very sneaky way of trying to
Control
control the
sneak.
situation, right? Versus just showing up authentically and then letting other people have whatever authentic reaction they have and learning to participate and be present to that. So it's a very good question. I want to be very careful of kind of leveraging open-heartedness as a way to try to control other people's reactions. Probably just a closed heart and clever disguise.
Definitely. Definitely resonate with that. Like so many times, especially in my younger days, like in my just thinking about I'll go out that way, even though it's not. Thinking back, it is kind of controlling. It is like you're trying to control a certain situation, even though you're not demanding things of people. You're trying to control a situation.
The most controlling a person ever is on a first date, right? Like it doesn't look controlling, right? It just looks like putting your best foot forward, but what you're doing is you're designing how you show up to get a specific reaction from somebody, right? And so the question is, how am I controlling for a certain reaction? And what would it look like to simply show up open-heartedly and allow the other person to have whatever reaction they're going to have? Ironically, that's the most sustainable path to a long-term relationship anyway, because you want to show up authentically, and then whoever celebrates what they see is they're your people, And this is how we get in trouble. We sort of like micromanage that first reaction to get a certain response. And now we've just got to micromanage that person forever. And as soon as we quit, they feel like we've changed when in fact we just quit being controlling. So yeah, I think there are very subtle ways in which we human beings are constantly trying to control every reaction, every interaction. And this book is about learning how to show up authentically with that open heart and being yourself in those moments rather than your most protective self.
Yeah, I'm really glad you referenced back to Michael Singer's book, Untethered to Soul, and that quote and the open-heartedness.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fantastic book. His other book, Surrender Experiment, is basically his memoir about how he arrived at the untethered soul. So good. And I think of this book as sort of a companion to those books because it's the how of how to choose open-heartedness moment to moment in any situation. And one thing I probably should say, because I think when we start to talk about open-heartedness, one of the first things people hear is like doormat. Wait, I have to have an open heart, meaning I just have to
raising
right? Like just let people do whatever they want. Like some things are bad, some things are wrong. You have to deal with that. And my encouragement to people is that an open heart never makes you weaker. It always makes you wiser, right? When you learn how to set boundaries with an open heart, you're at your most powerful. A lot of us assume that if I have an open heart, I can't have boundaries. And that's just simply not true. The real sweet spot of personal growth is that space where you're learning how to have an open heart while having boundaries. And this is where really healthy relationship takes place. So I like to address that and just say, I know we have a sort of connotation that goes along with that word open-hearted, but it will always make you wiser, not weaker.
Like, I'm glad you brought that up, and it not being a doormat as being like a strength, but having that open heart, being true to yourself.
In fact, I think it's so important that when you go into the process in those three parts, the third part, getting connected, the first chapter in that part is setting boundaries without battles. So it's basically in this chapter, you're at that point in the process now where you've developed the capacity to show up open-heartedly to your relationships. And the first real thing to get to practice is how do I keep an open heart while I'm setting boundaries? I think the poet Kabir said, do what you do with another human being, but never put them out of your heart, right? Set your boundaries, but you don't have to close your heart to them to do that, right? And so, yeah, it's that important. And I think that chapter on boundaries is actually one of the most powerful parts of the book.
No. Yeah, boundaries is something I know a lot of us can struggle with. So yeah, that sounds like a powerful part of the book as well. So, yeah, I know the book's going to be really exciting, a big impact on many people. I'd love to know, Dr. Kelly, as we kind of wrap up today, where can the listener get hold of your book to read all this amazing, like how to be open-hearted, to work through things like triggers, whilst holding boundaries and much more. And is there maybe something you'd like to leave us with today in terms of a final point or share?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly you'll be able to buy this book on in paperback, digital, and audio wherever books are sold. However, if you go to roadlesstriggered.com, roadlesstriggered.com. There are $348 worth of bonuses available to anyone who pre-orders by the end of release week. So for a very limited time, you're going to get an additional 90-minute masterclass that I created that sort of walks you through the whole process in extra detail. You're going to get an opportunity to join my online community at the paid level for 6 months if you pre-order and go to that page, roadlesstriggered.com. The other thing I would say is just right now, honestly, I've never done this on a podcast, but right now, so it can be sort of hard to picture this process. I have an incredible graphic framework that lays it out. I've recorded a brief video tutorial that sort of takes people through the process. You don't have to buy a book to get it. You don't have to, you don't have to join in, but I'd be happy to send that to anybody who's listening if they just emailed me at drkellybonus@gmail.com, drkellybonus@gmail.com. I'll send you the brief video tutorial, and you can pick up that as well. Full disclosure, it would subscribe you for free to my online community, the Less Triggered Tribe, and then you can unsubscribe at any time. But I think that would be a cool way for people to get an introduction. But if they're ready to jump right in, go get the book. Go get it today.
Amazing. Yeah. Pre-order and get all those bonuses. It's out the 6th of March, did you say?
March 3rd, actually. Tuesday, March
3rd. March 3rd.
Yep.
Oh, amazing.
Right. It's coming up.
Amazing. Yeah, just to grab Dr. Kelly's book, pre-order it, or reach out about those amazing that amazing tutorial you've got together. Find all those links in the show notes below. So be sure to take advantage of that.
Very cool. Yeah, and thank you for this opportunity to get to talk about, to me, what is the sometimes most subtle but most important moment in relationships is that first moment you just start to twinge closed a little bit. I really believe that if people start to tune into that moment in relationships and feel empowered to do something different in it, the ripple effects in their life are almost unimaginable. So thanks for the chance to get to talk about that.
Oh, amazing. No, appreciate everything you're doing and everything you've shared today, and really excited for the books. That's awesome. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Johnny.
Awesome. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.